Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and this is a one-on-one interview. I am joined by Mark Critchley, Manchester football writer for The Athletic. How are you doing, first of all?
I'm okay. It's another week covering this football club.
Yeah.
Absolute madness.
There's a lot going on in there. We're going to get through all of it. We're going to be looking at the ownership saga, Jadon Sancho. There's been sort of revelations in the last day or so regarding him. This potential move for David De Gea. What's going on there? Just so many things to get into. But let's start with the more recent stuff. You wrote a piece after Onana's save in the Copenhagen game about how United can't be relying on sort of individual brilliance, individual moments. And that was a phrase that we heard a lot under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. By the end, it almost became the defining phrase of the Solskjaer era, didn't it? That he's not coaching, there's no tactics, it's just individual brilliance. We're starting to see these words sort of raise their head again with Ten Hag. Yeah. First of all, do you think Ten Hag has a philosophy? And if he does, why are we struggling to see it? Because we could all see what he was doing at Ajax. Mm-hmm. We could I could sort of give you a bit of a bullet points of what we were trying to do last season.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you look at this season, everything seems to have gone out the window. What's going on there?
Yeah, I feel like you have to take him on his word. And I thought one of the most interesting things that he said in terms of tactics and style of play, it's a subject that managers often don't want to go into because they don't want to give things away.
Of course.
But he did say during pre-season, he was talking about how he wanted United to be the best transition team in Europe, in the world. And what that means, to my mind, is playing very quickly. It means looking for the counter-attack. It's something that we were quite familiar with under Solskjaer, wasn't it? He wanted to use players like Rashford and Fernandez's passing and stuff, and he wanted the team to get forward quickly. I think Ten Hag's come round to that as well. You have, again, take him on his word. That's what he's saying he wants to do. And I think the evidence of that has been all over this season because you've seen how when United attack, there's so many players crashing into the box. There's Casemiro going. He's supposed to be the holding midfielder. He's up there trying to get a flick on.
He's been winding me up. That I've been saying that on this channel. He needs to actually be a little bit more disciplined, Casemiro. Yes. But he's top scorer for United this season.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Yeah. When you're holding midfield, the guy who's supposed to bring control to the team is your top scorer. There's something wrong there. And there was a bit of a narrative, wasn't there, about how he's been overwhelmed, Casemiro. He didn't seem to be overwhelmed. He was running in and joining in with it all, as far as I could tell.
Overwhelmed by what? Sorry,
he had Mount and Fernandez ahead of him, and he was left to do all the protection.
Okay, so overwhelmed tactically rather than mentally. Yeah. Okay.
Well, he hasn't. Obviously, he wasn't. He was injured for the Sheffield United game. He was suspended for the Copenhagen game the other night, and those were two of pretty underwhelming performances, I would say. Of these 3 wins that we've just had, I'm struggling to think of 3 worst performances that have ended up in a positive result over.
I'll raise you the Wolves game at the start of the season.
That wasn't great.
That was pretty
either.
horrendous. But I completely agree with your point. Unfortunately, they've not been sort of confident, resounding victories, have they? So why do you think he's struggling to implement this style then? Because we do see sometimes almost like you said this sort of frantic rush, but it doesn't feel like controlled explosions. Yeah. I hate to say it, but the team that I think of when I think of that was that Liverpool side in 2020, where they would just win the ball and 5 seconds later they've scored a goal. Yeah. Constantly, over and over, hundreds of times. Yeah. Whereas United, we win the ball back and people are rushing, people aren't finding the space, they're not finding the pass, we're running into the men we saw against Copenhagen the other day, running into the goalkeeper. Everything looks nervous and rushed. Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is to do with form, almost breeds into form, if you know what I mean. Starting off the season quite poorly, not performing well at the very beginning, then there becomes confidence issues, there becomes issue with the mood. There's been lots of off-field stuff that we've seen this season as well. But I think I think it's a problem of almost like the players just don't really have the capacity to do it. You're demanding too much of them. Very few teams in world football play in the way that United are playing at the minute. Very few top teams who play that quickly. I think I was looking at some stats the other day in terms of the speed, in terms of how quickly they're getting the ball forward. They're like 3rd or 4th in the Premier League, and if you look at the teams that are even quicker than them, it's like Bournemouth and West Ham, and teams who you expect to be looking to play on the counter-attack. Top teams don't really do that. So I don't know if it's almost a question of the players not being able to fulfill the style, as maybe this isn't the style that they should really be going for anyway. Now, if you look at the personnel, you think of Rashford. There's arguably no better player who's better at breaking in, on the counter-attack, breaking in behind defences, using his speed. Again, like I said before, Fernandez's long-range passing and ability to pick people out. Casemiro has a bit of that as well, and Onana, obviously. You're seeing all those really long balls that they're trying to hit, but no top team plays like this, and I think that's the question. Like, is this the way that United really should be playing?
So, the thing, I go back to this Ten Hag at Ajax, because that's the last time that we saw him be truly successful. What is it? He won. Well, I think he won the Eredivisie every season he was there, and they were top of the league the year it was cancelled. So it was sustained success. This similar style. Is it the same style, or is he trying to evolve his tactics? Because why could it work there, but it can't work here? I know the standards are different, but we saw them beat Real Madrid with that style. We saw them, really they should have beat Tottenham. I know they didn't, but they were successful against Tottenham. If you want for that sort of heroic Lucas Moura performance, they would have been in a Champions League final. Why was it working then, but it's not working now? Or is it a different system?
I think it's a different system. I think he's trying to do something that is slightly, there's a bit of a misconception about Ten Hag sometimes about how he's from this Ajax school. It's all about short passing. It's all about beautiful football. He has always been willing to mix it up a little bit more. But I do think when you're at a club like Ajax, who has those traditions, who has players brought up in that style, if you like, then you're going to have to adapt to the circumstances. And so I think that's what you saw there, was a bit more possession based. Not totally, but a bit more. Again, you walk into United, it's a club with, Gary Neville always talks about it, flying wingers, 4-4-2, getting the ball forward quickly. Again, you've got players like Rashford who suit that style. So he's come in and he's adapted, he's changed it, and he's tried to fit it to the resources at his disposal. But at the moment, it's not really. It's too much for me at the moment. It's too quick. It's too fast. And the funny thing is, the curious thing is, I bet a lot of people disagree with me when I say this, because the other night against Copenhagen, I went half-time, I had a look at what people were saying about the performance, because it was so bad. It was horrendous, that first half performance. And people were like, they're too slow, they're too ponderous, they're not making decisions quickly enough. So people have different takes and are looking at the same thing and coming back with different opinions. But it feels to me like what everybody agrees upon is that it's just not clicking. Whatever the plan is, it isn't working.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want to move on, sort of kind of transitioning toward the Sancho stuff, but a sort of a middle question that sort of fuses the 2 points. What's the dressing room like at the minute? Because obviously it can't be amazing because we're not playing that well, so I wouldn't expect everyone to be dead happy, and I kind of understand why they wouldn't. But are people getting frustrated with these tactics? Are, sort of, not talking about Sancho here, but the people who are playing week in, week out, do they believe in it? Are they happy with it? Or do they, are they sort of starting to question things as well?
I don't think we're at that point yet, to be honest, and I wouldn't want to say that. I think that, the progress that was made last season, and there was definite progress made last season, I think that's still, there's a lot of credit in the bank from that. I think Ten Hag came in and immediately, earned respect, I think, through the way that he managed the club, the way that, he's held quite a strict disciplinarian line. So I think players are in no way, questioning the management. It's definitely not got to that point. I do think that obviously people will have different opinions about the way certain situations have been handled, and we'll come on to Sancho. But I don't really think that the dressing room is a source of concern for the moment. What I would say is that if results turn around, if form picks up, then those things naturally kind of heal themselves and everyone starts to feel better. And like I say, Ten Hag's got enough credit in the bank from what he did turning the club's fortunes around last season. Yeah,
I think it's a good sign that there are still people that believe in him, and I know there's more to it than just binary, did you win a trophy or not, but I do think eventually what let Solskjaer down was he didn't have that trophy to go, hang on a sec, if we do this right, I can deliver this. Yeah. The fact that Ten Hag's already got that, even if it is a Carabao Cup, like you said, definitely puts some sort of credence
and I think
there.
Even with Ollie, it was almost like, I think the leeway that he gave a lot of players became an issue in the end as well. Right. And you saw that, when he, in his caretaker phase, that was a completely different change of approach from Mourinho, and that liberated a lot of players, and the performances followed. But you can have too much of a good thing, right? And that was, by the end, I think we could all see that players weren't totally 100% behind his methods and his style of management. Whatever, top guy, and did a lot of good for the club, I think. But in the end, that's how it fell apart. We're definitely not at that stage yet, I would say, with Ten Hag, 100%.
Someone who might be at that stage is Jadon Sancho.
Yeah.
A big article came out about from Lower, well, obviously your colleague at The Athletic, about this Sancho situation with a little bit more detail and specifics of what happened, when it happened, why it happened. So for anyone who didn't read that, the overall gist is, before the game against Arsenal, the 3-1 loss, Sancho was asked to essentially pretend to be an Arsenal player in their system and their style, so that the first team who were going to play the next day could practice against a sort of similarly styled team. And as far as Ten Hag was concerned, he didn't put in the effort, he didn't try hard enough, he didn't press hard enough, and Sancho thought he did. Mm-hmm. So from that article, it also says that Ten Hag went to Sancho and already had told him, I didn't think this was good enough, before the post-match interview, where he said basically the same thing publicly. So it wasn't like Sancho was learning this for the first time. He already knew. He'd sat down and watched footage and this sort of thing. Every bit of evidence that comes out seems to suggest even more so that Sancho is in the wrong to me. Like, and maybe this is just my personal opinion. I will get to a bit more. I'll cover all bases as well. But what is Sancho's opinion of this? Because if your manager asks you to do something, if you're not getting picked in the team, it's still your job to do the thing that he tells you to do, surely. Is there more to it than this? Is there going to be another angle come out from the Sancho side of things? Because if your coach says, I didn't think you did enough there, and you say, well, I think I did, his opinion beats yours, surely.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I can only really agree with everything that you've said. And again, it's kind of a matter of opinion, isn't it?
Yeah.
And look, you're right, there'll be different versions of the same events, I imagine. But I think what Laurie's put down today, people can go and read it and make their own judgments from it. I feel like whatever anyone's opinion on it, both sides are kind of entrenched in this place now, where a resolution, or a happy resolution, one where Sancho comes back and gets back in the team, is a long, long way off. So, look, I think what Sancho feels about it, what he thinks about it, a lot of it was in that statement for everyone to see, because it was totally unfiltered, wasn't it? And look, that's one way. If you're going to burn your bridges, that's one way to do it, to go out and put it publicly without the manager even having sight of it beforehand, and to say that you've been scapegoated. So that's how he feels. Again, players kick up fusses for all kinds of different reasons, but most of all, the one thing that most of them want to do is play, and play regularly. And he wasn't doing that, was he? No. Back in the last season or at the start of this one. So I imagine that's one of the huge bugbears that he's got. But look, again, with what Laurie's documented today, if that's the crux of the problem, if that's really what this all comes down to, then I can see why a lot of people will side with the manager over the player in that case.
Do you think that we're sort of past the point of no return with Sancho now? Is there, I mean, obviously he could apologise and all this and all that, but this has gone on for so long that, we've all had arguments with friends, with partners, with colleagues, whatever, and usually after your anger comes down, which is 48 hours max, you can sort of look at the situation objectively, apologise for your part in it, and especially if it's with your boss, you just suck it up. Like, this has been going on for 6 weeks now?
Yeah.
Over a month? Like, surely if he was ever going to apologise, he can't still be angry about it in that, that initial burst. Like, surely if he was going to apologise, he would have done it by now. Do you see a way back for him?
It's difficult, definitely. I don't, not particularly know would be my answer, but it's from his position. I'm trying to get into his head.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Just one piece from the article again. We'll put the link to the article in the description so you can read the full thing, and I don't want to, go and read all of Laurie's article back to people. But one point he does make, which I thought was very, very interesting, was he said that Sancho almost feels like him deleting that post was sort of sorry enough. That he didn't think he should have to apologise or sort of show, I don't know the exact phrasing, but basically apologise twice by deleting the post first of all, which is a sorry of sorts, and then also having to go and apologise to Ten Hag. But
I think it was also that Ten Hag, that the fact that he had apologised to Ten Hag would be made public, and he saw that as well as a like almost doing it twice, like you said.
Yeah, but that just feels like a sort of, a pride before everything thing, doesn't it? Like, well, I can't be seen to apologise twice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I think for it to get to this situation, and again, trying to put myself in Sancho's shoes, if he apologised, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, if he apologised, what would he get out of it? Would he just return to being a player who's on the bench, who's, as he feels, not getting a look in, a fair crack of the whip? What situation is he trying to salvage here? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate with it. While covering this story, we've been trying to speak to people who know Sancho, people who've worked with him in the past, to get a sense and an idea of his character. And one guy that I spoke to said that he'd never had a problem with him, and he felt that, there's this whole thing about the video games and stuff, and sometimes you might have to tell him to get off his Xbox at 10 p.m. at night and go to bed. But other than that, there wasn't, he was a lovely kid who came in and applied himself every single day. And if there was an issue, or if there was ever anything, he felt that he was somebody who would benefit more from an arm around the shoulder kind of approach, like softly approach. And again, look, I feel like I'm sticking up for Sancho.
Yeah, well,
but I feel like
I don't think that's an issue. I think representing both sides and trying to look, because he is a man who is was one of the most highly talented players and sort of praised youngsters in the world. I keep saying it, but it was him, Haaland and Mbappe were like, these three might be the next generation of top players in the world at one point. Yeah. And then now he's gone from that to being, not just has his performance been poor in the Premier League, his reputation and him as a man and his attitude and what he's like is being sort of dragged through the mud as well. So there's part of you that wants to sort of stick up for him. I get that. So part of me wants to sympathise and look at it from his situation. But I always come back to that thing of, he's your boss. Yeah. Like that's the last thing of it. Like, Ten Hag decides, you don't. I just can't get any more out of it than that. Yeah. The deeper I look, I still come back to that phrase. Yeah. Look, that's the way that we've always understood manager and player relationships, isn't it? Especially at United, where I think almost the ghost of Sir Alex Ferguson hangs over the whole way that every manager deals with every situation. And look, I think if you even look back, there'd be a bit more nuance in the history of how Ferguson dealt with players. I remember, people used to say how he would be harsher on some than others, for example, a Wayne Rooney kind of character. You'd have to make sure that he was towing the line and that he wasn't getting in trouble outside of the football club. But someone like Paul Scholes would be somebody who benefit more from, again, that kind of arm around the shoulder kind of advice and a way of dealing with people like that. So it's difficult. I think Ten Hag does have one kind of direct way of doing things and is very disciplinarian in that sense, and that will probably rub up the wrong way with some players. But it's, again, I keep coming back to what you're saying. Look at what Sancho did. Look at what, posting that message and basically calling out your manager publicly is a huge, huge step to take. And it's not actually that surprising when you step back and think that we're still 7 or 8 weeks down the line. There's been no apology, and so the situation is exactly the same because it was such a drastic step to take. Yeah, it was. What did the other players make of it? Because obviously, Jadon Sancho will have mates, and if you think of any workplace, there's nothing that sort of binds a workplace together than hating on the boss. Right. I've worked in everywhere. I've worked bars, coffee shops, but he's been a dickhead, isn't it? Is there a group of players? Is there anyone that's sort of going, he's been a dickhead to Jadon there? He's, sort of taking his side. What's the general consensus, do you think? I think that, again, I think that, and you've seen various people report in the last couple of weeks about how some players have had a word with Sancho and basically said that they think he should apologise. I think that is a general sense of how the players feel. I don't think it's universal. I don't think everybody in the club feels that way. I think there's some people who would look at the situation and if they were in Ten Hag's shoes, they would handle it differently. Yeah. But at the same time, they're not. There's the manager. And again, United's a club where so much is instilled within the manager and his decision that ultimately the players, the staff, the backroom staff, the people around the club are going to fall in behind that. So that's generally, I think, if you were going to sum it up, you'd say that the club is supportive of Ten Hag's decision, and that includes people behind the scenes and in unofficial channels as well. But that's not to say that there isn't
some kind of opinion that maybe things could have gone a bit differently, and maybe they would have turned out a bit differently if they'd been handled differently.
Yeah. Just finally on Sancho, where could he go?
Yeah.
And who could United get to replace him?
Good question. Look, where could he go? I think the obvious answer is Saudi Arabia, right?
Do you think?
I think so, because the wages are that big. It would be an easy kind of get out, a quick deal to do. You saw how they were managing, teams in the Saudi Pro League were managing to just sweep up players, or any unwanted player, except if you were Eric Bailly.
Yeah, he couldn't quite make it work.
Oh no, he did actually go there in the end, didn't he? But still, oh no, Besiktas. If you went to Besiktas, it's a long transfer window.
It was.
But so unless you're Eric Bailly, you're able to pick it up. And if you're playing the new football manager's out, and apparently on that, Saudi clubs are always in for your players.
Just going for all the time.
That's and I think that's the most likely option. It would be somewhere quick and easy. It could even be a loan, perhaps.
Juventus were mentioned a couple of times recently as well, weren't they? And then there was this sort of Dortmund name kind of swirling around, but everyone who actually looks at it goes, well, they couldn't get him, but they like him and they're chatting to him.
Yeah,
What's that? Why are you doing that then?
I think his wages would be kind of prohibitive for Dortmund, and they also. You could say that it says something that if they're not immediately coming back into him as well, because they obviously have an experience of dealing with him. Yeah. But look, he was brilliant there, wasn't he? So I do think the finances make it difficult for Dortmund. You'd have to be looking at, again, Saudi Arabia for that point of view, because it's no barrier to them. Yeah. Although and I think Chelsea's been mentioned as well because of his connections there. He was obviously in the City Academy, wasn't he? Yeah. Joe Shields there. Their big academy guy, who's now in charge of, he's basically one of the directors of football at Chelsea. He's such a huge fan of him. So there's that link as well you could potentially draw, but we're still at a very speculative stage, I think. Okay.
And in terms of potential replacements, maybe, to be honest, I think the right wing is an area that's we probably have needed reinforcements regardless of Sancho's situation. Yeah. Are there any names that United are keen on that we've been looking at? Kingsley Coman's one that's been mentioned year after year after year after year. Yeah. Serge Gnabry was mentioned a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago as well. Is that an area that United are looking at, whether Sancho stays or not, and if so, is there any names? I wouldn't
want to mention names at this stage, just because if you mention names, then people think, oh wow,
people think it's happening.
People think it's happening. But look, I think there's an acceptance that if he goes, then there'll be a bit of a hole to fill there. Yeah. It's not as bad as it looked a couple of months ago, because the Antony situation has kind of not resolved itself, but he's back in training and he's playing again. I think that one big consideration is FFP still, because I know it's a bed of weeds to.
Why is it only us that has to worry about FFP? It's like us and then teams in the Championship, and everyone else in the Premier League is just like, yeah, fine, FFP, don't worry about
Apart
that.
From Everton, they're getting a 12-point deduction.
Well, they're getting a 12-point deduction, but they just spend like absolute madmen. Yeah. They're like Villa are just spending loads of money. Everyone's spending loads of money. Everything's fine. Tottenham have got £1 billion in debt for a new stadium, and somehow that's all right. But when United want to buy a new player, we can't. I mean, sorry, obviously there's so much more nuance to that.
Go off, that's fine.
It just does my head in though. It's like, why does no one else have to worry about FFP?
Well, it's because you spent loads of money.
No, don't say that. Tell me it's a conspiracy against Man United. Come on.
Sorry. No.
You were looking at the finances today, obviously, you were telling me before. Why are United struggling for FFP when I'm not hearing that word with Chelsea? Obviously, we never hear it with City unless it's them sort of sweeping stuff under the rug.
Well, yeah.
You hear it, but it never amounts to anything.
It's a different thing with City.
United are struggling to have the money to buy new players. Yeah. Why is that?
Basically, and I trying to dig into this, I'm going to try and put this in a way that doesn't make me want to violently punch myself in the face, because you're trying to understand this. Things change all the time. But if you think of the Ronaldo season, I'm going to call it the Ronaldo season, where he came back, finished was it 6th or 7th? I can't remember now. It was lowest Premier League points total, whatever. It was a total disaster on the pitch. It was a disaster off the pitch as well, because in the books, the club basically lost before tax £150 million. Now,
that's terrible.
It's a lot of money. I think people don't think that's a lot of money in football, but to put it in context, the season before they lost 20 million. That was behind closed doors. So you get fans back in the stadium, people paying season tickets and tickets again. Yeah. Build up that match day revenue, and yet you still lose 150 million. So that is a huge amount of money to lose. And the thing is, that's still part of the test that United have to do this season. So they've lost 150 million in the Ronaldo season. The figures have come out today where they've lost about 34 million last season.
Right.
So that's about 185 million pounds that they need to basically, get down on, because if you lose more than 15 million over a 3-year basis, then you're in breach of FFP. Now, there's lots of deductions that they can make for youth teams, for women's football, for all that, but it basically means that a lot hinges on how much money comes in and out of the club this season as to whether they're going to breach FFP or not. So towards the end of the window that last week, we were all expecting it to be pretty calm, weren't we? But in the end, Luke Shaw got injured, so they had to try and find a left back. They wanted Cucurella, too expensive, so they've gone for Reguilon because it was a cheaper option. Amrabat, they went back and forth trying to haggle on the price, and then eventually got it over the line. So it wasn't going to be a big consideration, FFP, this summer. They had to think about it when doing the Onana, Højlund and the Mount deal, but it became a huge thing during the end because it was so tight, and that's going to be the case again in January. So in terms of replacements, I mean, Sancho if you get Sancho off the books, that's a load of wages and maybe quite a bit of money coming in, not 72 million or whatever you spent.
You might get 30 odd for, something
still,
in that region. Yeah,
and look, if they sold a Scott McTominay or someone like that, I know his stock's risen a bit over the last few weeks, but if they got rid of him, that would really help because he's an academy player and that helps with all the amortisation and all that stuff that I don't really fully understand. Yeah. But the problem is they're kind of in a position where money needs to come in before it can really be spent. So that's your limitation on any replacements.
Great. So that's Mbappe out the window then.
Yeah, just about.
We could have bought him with that 150 million that we lost in 2021. Speaking of getting players in on big wages, there's a rumour today that David De Gea is coming back as a potential backup to Onana, cover for the African Cup of Nations. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I believe it. What are the odds of that happening?
I don't think they're particularly high at the minute.
Good.
I would say. Look, I think you only need to look at the way that he left the club in the summer, right?
Yeah.
It was so messy, the fact that it happened like a week after his contract had actually expired and that we didn't know whether he was coming or going. I think obviously in The Athletic, I think Laurie was reporting around the time how Ten Hag's decision on it really just changed after that FA Cup final. So, De Gea got to that point where he was still believing that there was a chance of him playing for United next season, perhaps on reduced terms, maybe not being a starter all the time, but still playing. But after that game, Ten Hag totally switched and made the decision to let go and go for Onana. So the whole messiness of that situation, whether the relationships would be, I'd be surprised personally if those relationships were repaired in such a quick time, like just a few short months after all that happened, to the point where he can come back to the club. I think it's unlikely. But it's out there. I just think 500 other players are always linked with it, so why not David De Gea?
I just think even from almost regardless of whether we need a keeper, whether he's any good or not, put all that to one side, it just looks so shit. Yeah. It makes United look terrible. Yeah. Like, you're not good enough for us. See you later. Off you go.
Wait a minute.
David, do you fancy coming back because we've changed up? Like, it just is an awful look for United, isn't it? When we're trying to move away from this like haphazard, we don't know what we're doing sort of image that we've cultivated over the last 10 years. To bring De Gea back would be almost like, I don't know, just the ultimate embarrassment, wouldn't it? Short of bringing Phil Jones in if Johnny Evans gets injured.
Well, he's not retired actually, has he yet? So don't rule it out 100%.
But just another question, this is just a separate thing really, just your opinion on it. Do you think there's a chance De Gea could retire? Because, what are we, 4 months, or is it October? 3.5 months into a new season. Mm-hmm. There's not even any, that I've seen, any real strong rumours linking De Gea with anywhere. No. The rumour initially was he doesn't want to go to a top club and be a backup, but he doesn't want to play for a small club. Where do you see his career? Because if he's not coming back to United, could this be the end of him? I don't know. It's
difficult because the perception around De Gea for the last, 3 or 4 years really became that he wasn't a modern keeper, right? Yeah. It was that he isn't able to do things that top clubs want out of their goalkeeper anymore. Yep. And I think, that perception has spread and bedded in, and that's precisely the reason why no top clubs were willing to make him their goalkeeper this summer and pay him to the his wages at United, 375 grand, it's huge money, right? Yeah. And obviously I expect that he was willing to take a cut to stay, and I don't think he's making those same demands now. But is any top club going to look at David De Gea in the year 2023 and think we're going to pay that amount of money for this guy? They're just not. So what other options are there? Again, it's like the get out of jail is Saudi, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he hasn't really shown that much of an inclination to wanting to do that either. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that he does decide, actually, pack it in, that's it for me. But, teams get desperate. Things happen, things change, and we might get to a later point in the season where it makes sense for someone.
We saw Keylor Navas in goal for Nottingham Forest last season, so literally anything is possible. Was he won 4 Champions or 3 Champions Leagues?
Yeah.
And you're playing for a team fighting relegation. Like, if Keylor Navas can play for Forest, I'm sure De Gea can get a club somewhere. Let's move on to the ownership stuff. This has obviously been rumbling on, but we've seen big updates, big changes in the last sort of 10 days, 2 weeks, maybe even slightly more than that now. Jim Ratcliffe looks set to, or while they're still thrashing out the minor details, set to be buying 25% of Manchester United. First of all, when do you think that will formally be sort of done, announced, whatever? Yeah. What is the current timeline for that?
I think we're still talking weeks, maybe months. It's something that I don't like. Ineos would like to be in the door by about January time, I reckon.
Is that for the transfer window, or is that just
I think,
a year thing?
Basically as soon as possible,
right.
Because then you can start, especially if you're having influence and control of the sporting side of things, then you want to be there when you can make the biggest impact, and that will be January, right?
Of course.
And I don't think there's no reason to believe that it won't be able to get done by then. But then these are still very complex, very detailed negotiations that need to take place, especially if you start to talk about things like, sporting control, but I know people have mentioned that they want some kind of mechanism within this deal for him to be able to launch a full takeover, like further down the line. That's extremely complicated to do, that sort of thing. That is almost making a deal before it's even happened, right? To have that written in. So this is going to be something that still takes a lot of time. I wouldn't expect it to be too quick, but things have happened after 6 months where there was basically nothing. Came in here over the summer with the Sheikh Jassim thing, which was just a bit of filler, just to put it out there, because once everything died down, it was like, well, who actually is this guy? We kind of had 6 months of that, and then over the past few weeks things have escalated. So that's how this process has gone. It's been fits and starts and a bit of a roller coaster. Again, it feels like this week has been a bit more of a lull in it, but that's simply because we still need to cross the T's and dot the I's and figure out how this deal actually gets done.
The people saying that there's going to be a combination of Jim Ratcliffe and Joel Glazer and potentially, I forget his name now,
it's Dave Brailsford.
Dave Brailsford,
yeah.
There's a lot of sirs knocking about, isn't there? It's like the House of Commons United's boardroom at the minute. A combination, some sort of arrangement, agreement for running the football side. Is this football side thing, and you may not know this, obviously it's not been put to pen to paper yet, but is the expectation that this will be an official, legal, you're in charge of this because this is your job title, or is it almost like the Glazers are going, we promise we'll let you make football decisions? Because you wouldn't assume Jim Ratcliffe is willing to spend, and I know it may not be all the money to buy Manchester United, but no human on earth spends £1.5 billion for a laugh. So do you think this is going to be official, or is he trusting the Glazers on this?
I think you've nailed it just there with saying that somebody wouldn't spend that much money without wanting something that legally says that you have control over this element of it. So I think there's probably various ways they could do that. Like at board level, they have committees, and there's like committees to make sure nobody's pinching out the books or stuff like that, audit committees, etc. You could probably do that. You could have a transfer committee and legally codify that. So I agree, he's not going to spend so much money without it written down somewhere that this is actually what he gets, rather than trusting the Glazers on it. But equally, I think you mentioned about this idea that Joel would be on that board and have some say over it, and so it wouldn't be total control of the sporting side. Again, like, if you're going to own, the Glazers will own, we don't know the final percentage it will be, but if Jim takes a 25% stake and they're still majority, they're still going to want oversight and a degree of, they want to know what's going on. on these huge financial decisions as you're going to drop £80 million on a player, they're still going to want to be in the room for that. So I think that's understandable from both sides. But yeah, look, this is one thing that still needs to be negotiated and agreed upon and shaken out, really. But like, I can't. A committee where you have a representative of Ineos or two Ineos guys and one Glazer makes sense to me, as that's because ultimately that's the kind of balance of power within that this deal is aiming to strike. What
changes do you think he'll make? There's been rumours of Murtagh and Arnold out, talk of Paul Mitchell, of Dave Brailsford, like you've mentioned. Are those, if Dave Brailsford's coming in, is that he's an investor, or he has an ownership in Ineos as well, doesn't he? A minority ownership. Right. So is he just coming in by default as part of that, or is this more of a structural change and Dave Brailsford is part of that? Is this a Arnold out, Brailsford in situation, or is it actually no, he just is part of Ineos, so he's coming with me?
I think Brailsford has had a huge influence on the stuff that they've done at Nice over the past 2 years, and he's basically made all the appointments there. He's picked people out. So yeah, you'd imagine that he comes in and he's going to play a huge part if the deal gets agreed, no doubt. But in terms of actual structural changes, I think speaking to people around the bid, they say it's nothing going to be totally immediate, right? So I don't think they're going to come in and you're going to see sweeping changes right away. They want time. They want to see what works, what doesn't work, and then try and apply the same structures and the same processes that they feel have worked for them in their other companies. Ineos is this huge thing that like does, I don't know, what are they called, like test tubes or like Bunsen burners or whatever, all these chemical stuff that you use in science in year 9. All that stuff.
He makes that little nozzle that if you turn it, it goes from a blue flame to an orange flame, letting in and out more oxygen on the test tube. He makes them.
Little droplet things.
The taps with the pointy nibs. He makes all that stuff.
I know someone who had a bad accident on one of those once, actually, but what happened? That's a story for another day. It's a bit sensitive.
Oh, is it? Bloody hell.
So there's various little departments to this company, and they all try and run them in the same way. They'd obviously come in and try to do that on the sporting side of United if they're successful with the bid. But I think it will take time for them to look at what works and what doesn't. One thing that I think is you can say for certain is that Ten Hag is in their plans, basically. Like if
that's good.
The way it was put to me is that if there's problems at United, then he's not one of them, basically. Maybe they're elsewhere within the club. So I don't think they'd look to make a change there. But the wider sporting structure is certainly all to play for.
I think this is something I've been sort of an opinion I've kind of been arriving on over the last sort of few weeks. But I keep looking at Ten Hag, and I truly don't think he is the problem. I think he's a very good manager. And I look at the alternatives around Europe, who we could feasibly get, what track records they have, and I really don't see a better option that is remotely available. And I think that at some point United need, and what we've lacked is people in the sporting world, or people in the sporting areas. So John Murtagh and to a lesser extent Arnold, but still obviously he's got the power there, who have got enough, either sort of, what would be the word? Either enough sort of cachet in the footballing world that people trust their opinion, or just enough confidence in their own ability to say, Ten Hag is the right guy, and we might have a season next year that's worse than this year, and this year maybe worse than last year, but we aren't sacking him because we see that it's right. At the minute, you look at John Murtagh, and if he came out and said, based on everything I know in the footballing space, I trust Ten Hag, people go, well, what do you know?
Right.
You know what I mean? He hasn't got a lot to fall back on in terms of, you look at Ajax and you see Overmars as it was, and you could say, okay, he's been a top class player, he can say that. You look at City and Tiki Bergestan, he was a top player, you can say that. Like, go through the world and you can see all these top players who you say, actually, if someone says this, I believe him. If Ed Woodward had come out and said, Jose Mourinho is the man, and what am I basing that on? My knowledge as a football person. You go, well, he's not the right man then, is he? Yeah. I feel like United need someone in there who can stick to their guns a little bit with Ten Hag and say, I don't care what's happening on the pitch at the minute, we know this will work. Do you think Dave Brailsford and Ineos have got that about them where they can sort of say, we think Ten Hag's right, and even if the results aren't good for, I don't know, months, we are going to stick with them anyway, and we can base that on what we did here, what we did here, what we did here?
Well, look at what they did there and there and there. If you go back to Nice, they've started this season really well.
Yeah.
He's made some pretty good appointments over the last
Their
18
new
months.
manager is very sort of radical,
He's
isn't
like
he?
a De Zerbi disciple, isn't he?
Yeah.
He was like on his team at the previous club. Yeah, like they've started really well this season, but basically that's like the first time in about 5 years that things have really started looking up there. Otherwise, it's been a lot of mediocrity, if you're honest.
Yeah.
I did a piece right at the start of this whole process, talking to fans of their other team in Lausanne in Switzerland, and they're in the second division. They've been relegated twice on Ineos's watch, and there's been like protests against them quite regular. And it was the same case at Nice up until recently. So, look, Brailsford has this huge like back catalogue of achievements within cycling, within wider British sports. There's also a lot of questions there around him as well that people will dig into, I'm sure. Jean-Claude Blanc is their chief executive guy. He was, according to all accounts, very successful at Juventus, at PSG.
Yep.
So there is pedigree there. There is like stuff that people can look at and say, well, you guys know what you're doing. But there's also their actual record in football isn't totally impressive, to be honest. So I can only really see the same questions being asked. You know, imagine it is Ineos controlled side, sporting side, 12 months down the line, and we have a start to the season like we've had with this one. I think the same questions are going to be raised, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'd say that.
That's why we need people who actually are good at their jobs doing stuff.
It's an idea, isn't it?
It's a good way. Do you think Man United are the biggest club in the world? Why don't we get the best people in the world to do these jobs rather than just someone's mates? Anyway, right, that's going to be all. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming in, explaining some of these situations. The one thing that is for sure is all of the questions I've asked you today are will they, won't they questions.
Yeah.
Nothing seems certain at United at the minute, does it?
That's it. Like every single day, there's some other new thing that needs, and some other question that needs answering. Actually, there was one day recently where I was going to bed and I was just like, great, this is the part of the day where I get to be unconscious because I don't have to think about this football club anymore.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wish we could just plug in and just be unconscious for about probably 2 years. We might have some clarity then. But thank you, Mark. Make sure you go and check out Mark. We'll put the link to your social media and stuff in the description. Mark Critchley from The Athletic. Again, we'll put a link to that Laurie Whitwell article talking about the Jadon Sancho situation, so you can read all of the full details as well in the description. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been a one-on-one interview. We'll see you in a bit.